You guys have more to say. We're saying because you're part of this. Yeah.
All right, thank you everybody for attending today. I'd like to call this meeting Joint City of Wausau Marathon County Homelessness Task Force agenda to order. First item on the agenda, let me pull it up here. Give me a second.
Call-in user who just joined, would you identify yourself, please?
Sure. This is Beth Richland.
Thank you.
All right. First meeting, I didn't have anybody sign up for public comment. So the next item on the agenda, the educational presentations committee discussion. Item number 4, discussion and possible action. Update on discussion and action by Marathon County Board and its subcommittees relative to recommendations from this task force, and discussion and possible recommendations regarding the parameters for the request for proposals relative to shelter services, including but not limited to deliverable, performance measures, billing, invoicing, and reporting. Any discussion on that? I can give you an update what we talked about on the county board. So we did pass the extension to April 1st for the task force, which gives us a few more weeks to develop our action item list and our plan. And then we pulled the funding from the agenda last week, and we are working to develop our funding sources and our discussion for the full board. The reason that we pulled it was because there were a lot of questions. So if you watch the meeting from last week, you'll see that there were a lot of questions that we need to answer before the county board will take up that vote. Not that we don't want to partner with the city. We absolutely do. And I think it's important that we send that message that we want to partner with the city on this as well. So the funding is still on the table. It's just tabled for the moment. I don't know, Supervisor Conway, do you have any comments to that as well?
So I believe HR Finance is still meeting at 5 o'clock tomorrow. So if we can get them something with better metrics and key point indicators and things like that, they could approve it and pass it on to the county board, which could get voted on tomorrow. So that's, if we could figure that out today, that's why they set it for tomorrow.
Sure. Go ahead, Matt.
It's working. So I attended that meeting. I listened to some of the questions and comments from county board members. And I think there's a misconception maybe on some of their ends, or the questions weren't necessarily answered to give them clarity, which is we have an exigent issue of shelter ends on May 1st. That's when Catholic Charities, who's operating their shelter on their own dime, which they did prior to the city assisting them in creating 365 shelter, they are done providing shelter services on May 1st. It is my opinion and the opinion of the city that we need 365 shelter here in order to maintain the improvements that we've seen as a result of 365 shelter. In order to determine what that shelter is going to look like in the future, we need to put measurables together and a request for proposals that identify what are those things that we're looking for that we want proposals to include. And so it is my responsibility on behalf of the city to lead the process on the city's end in putting that request for proposals together. The desire is to have the county join us in that, but what I heard was county involvement in developing an RFP, but yet no commitment from the county to fund any of the expense that would be part of that proposal. And I believe that what the city would like to see, and I would like to see, is a commitment a financial commitment to share in that financial burden with the city, and then direct county staff to work with city staff to develop that proposal, have the county board provide, if there are county board members that have things that they need to see in that proposal, there's an opportunity to give direction to county staff that these are things that we want to see in that. I would even be okay with, if those things aren't in it, that there's a clawback provision of some type. But the idea that the city's going to work with the county on developing a proposal when the county hasn't committed any dollars to it, that's putting the cart in front of the horse, in my opinion. And once that has occurred, I think it's the responsibility of staff directed from the county board to county staff and the city to city staff to work with our partner organizations and develop that long-term plan. And we heard from La Crosse, who had made numerous errors and mistakes, and they learned from those, that when they come up with their Pathways Home program, that took months and months of time and partnership to be able to come up with a plan that they have faith in. And so I heard from county board members that they want to see the plan first. And that's a giant ask on the part of staff when there's no commitment to fund any of the things that would be part of that plan. So for me, the easiest step forward is to get commitment from both the city and the county to fund 365 Shelter, assign staff to put that RFP together, because it needs to start next week. It's not a thing that we can wait weeks and wait for meetings and try and address all those issues, because May 1st is around the corner and we need to draft the RFP, get the response from the RFP and the proposals, measure which proposals, whether we like what we're seeing, and then enter into negotiations and contract with, ideally, with someone to provide those shelter services. I don't know how that happens if we continue to put that decision-making off to future meetings. It's a pretty simple one. It's, do we need shelter? Do we want 365 Shelter in this community? I believe the answer is yes. I think this committee said the answer to that was yes. And now the question before the board is, are they willing to contribute to that? And their needs will be met by assigning county staff to work with me and city staff on that RFP. I think that's the answer to the questions. It might not satisfy everyone, but that's what it is. And you guys, the county is in a tough situation because it's a budget amendment, so it requires a 2/3 vote to be able to do that. But to me, the simple question is, should we have 365 Shelter, and what does this community look like if we don't have 365 Shelter? And I would, if anybody wants me to bring the pictures of what the encampments underneath the bridges and in our parks look like, I'm more than happy to do that, because what alternative do police officers have when people are living in areas that we have ordinances that say they can't live in, and they say, well, where can I go? We have the ability to answer them with, to shelter. If we don't get that figured out right now, the answer is going to be, I don't know. And I can just tell you that I don't direct officers to go remove people's encampments and create this environment that I think everybody wants if the answer is nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Barnes. And we've had Chair Robinson here from HR Finance. Chair Robinson, do you think, I'd like your opinion on the financing side of things, to be able to, for us to give some direction to the county board on, how we can work out this scenario.
Thank you. I think we have a chicken and egg conundrum, whatever you want to call it. I understand Chief Barnes's perspective, but I think what I took out of the meeting last week was that there was a little bit more of a desire to know what that RFP will look like when we go out, what sort of performance standards, expectations, service delivery outcomes would there be? Is it serving 30 people a night? Is it 45 people a night? Are there handoffs? And I think there were a number of concerns that were expressed, including the concern over growing the size of the homeless population. through it. And again, you need the 2/3 vote. I don't think that if it would have come out of committee last week, it would have been on a split vote, and probably not positioning it well for a 2/3 vote on the county board. So my request today would be, are there some opportunities for us to, as we're looking toward that RFP, capture what some of those outcomes would look like? Is it serving X number of people a night? What is it? What are the goals of the program? There are references in the material that went out for today's meeting relative to wraparound services and other things. Are there opportunities for us to define what some of those services that would be provided would look like? A number of the county board members are saying, this is a new program, we don't need to do it, why should we do it? And I think what we have to do is give them a little bit better understanding of what the goals of the program are.
I mean, I think we're, in my non-parliamentarian opinion, we're agendized that since those meetings are tomorrow, that we would be well served to use some of our time tonight to discuss as a committee or a task force, what is the ideal state of shelter, and we create a list of things that we would like to see in an RFP. We might be able to put, for example, we want a capacity of 60 or 50 or whatever that number is. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the organizations have the ability to accommodate that, but they can reply in their response, understanding what our ask is, and be able to tell us, here is what we're capable of doing and timelines associated with that. So I would encourage us to use our time wisely here. I have a ton of faith in the people sitting around this table to come up with a list of what we'd like to see in that RFP. Additional things that have not been done yet, but that I am committed to do in the RFP process, is to reach out to different providers of services, nonprofit or NGOs in our community, and solicit their input into what they would like to see to be, not necessarily to be included in the RFP, but that we have consulted with them, as well as meeting with and talking to people that have a lived experience in homelessness, and get their perspective on shelter and what ideal shelter services look like here. That's not going to be done by tomorrow, but I also think we can put some parameters around what ideal shelter would look like here, and have that prepared so that those questions might be able to be answered tomorrow.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I did watch the meeting after fact online, and I know one of the reservations that I think we should answer pretty confidently, one of the reservations that came up is that what are business community doing, what are others doing, and why are we relying on government? I heard that, and you're nodding your head, you heard that. So I mentioned, as the faith-based representative, I kind of polled the 5 primary nonprofits that are serving the unhoused community, and I put that together in a report that I shared with you that could be used later. But I went back and I asked, and I don't have a full response yet. When you start talking about asking people about finances, they're a little more hesitant to share. But just with the 2 responses I've got, it was over $1 million that is committed from the non-government community. That, I'd be very transparent here. But between the 2 of them, and one of us included, we're getting annually from the private sector, between those 2, over $1 million annually. And that doesn't count the $3.6 million that we've already raised for our new campus. And so if I project that equally for the other 3 agencies that did not respond, did not share, you're looking at least $2.5 million annually that the private sector is contributing to the unhoused situation in our community. And that doesn't include our campaign, which will get to 5 million at some point, but we're at 3.6. So that's a huge number. And it really pales the ask of what we're making from the public or from the government sector. And so I don't know if that could be communicated, or that'd be good to be communicated from this committee to that, that, yes, there is. I wanted to shout into the screen, yes, the business community, the private community, the people are already contributing large portions of money to the county's homeless, unhoused situation. And now the city has been very generously contributing. So the missing player is possibly the county. And I don't want to do that in a mean-spirited way. But I think that maybe could be part of the presentation tomorrow, is some of those numbers. And if that would help, speed things up a little bit.
Thank you, Craig. And I think that's important as well, to get that information out there. And I think that was one of the questions, like you said, that the board had. What is the private community doing? So I think that's huge. I think what you just said there, estimates of 2.5 million or possibly more from the private community annually. Absolutely. I think that's important. And Chief Barnes, I think we can talk about, putting some data together for the meeting tomorrow. And I'd ask Administrator Leonard, if we get some information together for tomorrow's meeting, is that enough time for HR Finance to review before the full board meeting?
I'll tell you at 5:50 tomorrow. But I think if you can address the issues that were raised, it will go a long way from the committee perspective and in trying to advance it. I don't know how the full board is, because we really didn't take the full funding issue to the board, but I sense there was some support, and I sense that there was some skepticism. So I think that the more questions we can answer, the more specifics we can wrap around the proposal, the better off it'll be.
Okay. So, Chief Barnes, I think you started it off pretty well about, how many beds, right, and what that looks like. So I think if we want to talk about that, we can talk about that and try to put some numbers together right now, at least estimates, and how the funding would support that. I think that would be good.
Sure.
This is a document that you put together or your department put together regarding the request?
I don't know which one you're
Oh, this one that was in the packet? Yeah, today's packet. Oh, you put that together. Okay, because I thought it answered some of the questions that people had, which is why I think that we already have some information that was asked. For example, they asked how much this was going to cost, and if the county did allocate the $200,000, how would they know how it would be spent, and was that too much money or whatever. This document answers that very specifically. So that's what I just wanted to make sure to ground in. There's something that's already here, but I didn't know who wrote it. So thank you. Yeah, I thought it was very detailed. Awesome.
ChatGPT, huh? No. So from a capacity standpoint, we've seen a very consistent number when Community on Call is activated of somewhere between 45 and 50. I'm well aware that there are individuals staying in cars or who get access to a couch in a warm place as a result of those cold temperatures. So I would advocate for a shelter capacity of between 50 and 60 beds, and then with the potential to expand in, under certain circumstances, another 10 to 15 beds. Again, that's not to say that any one organization within our community can meet that right now, but that's what the need is at the current state. and that gives it some flexibility to grow. But I think when phase 2, which is coming up with the plan, if the plan is successful, the capacity need shouldn't grow, ideally, if it works. And it should shrink. So if, at least in my head, what I anticipated to see in an RFP is that ideal state we're asking for is between 50 and 60 beds. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts about that.
The only thought would be we're basing that kind of on summer need or winter needs, and usually summer needs are greater than winter needs as far as the population, because more people choose to leave their homes or get put out of the situations. And if you look at your point in time counts, I'm pretty sure it's pretty consistent, and you may be able to tell me that the July count is bigger than the January count. So that would be the only thing. But you kind of built that in. If you do the 50 to 60 with the flexibility of another 15, you've hit probably the realistic number.
So
So there are more people out in the streets in the summertime, for sure. So there, okay.
here you go.
Okay, can you hear me? All right, so our point in time is always higher in the summer, like 30 people versus 4, because a lot of people don't want to stay in a shelter in the summertime. But when it's really super hot, they do. So I kind of agree with Matt that 55 to 65 would be a good number with the potential to expand 10 to 15.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you want to do this committee, just by consensus. If we're all nodding, like that sounds good, do we put that down?
Yeah, does everybody agree? 50 to 60?
But you get a vote on the committee.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at the data that we've reviewed over the past several meetings, I think that number is a decent number. And I think, Craig, what are you thinking as far as summer?
Well, I think the ideal setting would be whoever has the RFP has the ability to expand if needed. Most shelters that I'm familiar with, other cities, and Catholic Charities does this even currently now, their capacity is 30, but when we get certain temperatures, they bump it up another 10. So that's happening in most places, and often that extra 10 isn't an established space that's used always. It might be set up in a gymnasium or a dining room or something like that. So I think whatever we have is we have that maybe 50 number or whatever with that ability and willingness on part of the agency to expand in circumstances where there is need for more.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions answered. The number of beds, we have the business and private funding question answered. Supervisor Robinson or Administrator Leonard, were there other questions that you think that we need to address at this point that you can remember?
I mean, I think there's one that having contracted for shelter services already or historically on behalf of the city, what makes the most sense to me is not an unknown every month cost. So to be able to request a price per month or a price per day to provide those shelter services. So that's the way I would want to see it in an RFP. I don't see any advantage to anything else. It allows us to budget and plan as opposed to, like in any business, it's not necessarily just the cost. I think whoever's replying to that proposal, the providing proposal, needs to build in their protections in what that monthly cost would be.
Okay.
Just again, this is you have the policy part that you've all talked about and what the county board is going to weigh in on, but to build on what Chief Barnes alluded to, one of the things the county has started to do in a lot of our requests for proposals and then in the contracting then that follows from the selection of the vendor is what was just alluded to. Not only the amount, an amount not to exceed as part of the contract, but then also a requirement that they do provide, whoever the vendor is, provides an accounting or an invoicing of their actual costs with a requirement that, yes, we have an amount not to exceed that we will get billed for, but you also don't get to bill just up to that amount if your costs are significantly less. So it's essentially a two-prong approach to ensure that you don't have a cost overrun, right? You have the cost of, let's just say it's the $30,000 a month, but also, hey, you don't get to bill $30,000 a month if your actual costs are only 12, right? You get to bill actual costs plus some amount of, additional revenue to cover overhead and things like that. So we certainly can put in the notes that I'm taking, and if the board supervisors wish to make that presentation to HR Finance and ultimately the full board, that idea that we would craft a request for proposals to provide as much protection or mitigation toward financial risk. I think that language covers it. But that's our approach in other areas. I hope that's helpful.
Is what is in the packet, is that cover that? Because at HR Finance, that seemed to be one of the big sticklers, not having a blank check. We want to know exactly the amounts. So if we get, monthly statements, we'll pay half of whatever they're paying. Is that satisfy that?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents on why I have required more than that. It has been my experience that if a contract says, hey, you bill us your actual costs with no amount not to exceed, you can incent let me nickel and dime and write every little thing, and suddenly it's, hey, we have a headquarters in another state that 12% of that executive director's time is allocated to overseeing this operation. And so I think to Chief Barnes's point, an amount not to exceed per month with a corresponding accounting and invoicing, and ultimately, one thing I just included in a contract not all that long ago was an audit and reconciliation requirement that, hey, at the end of every year, I want to see where you shook out and see what that gap is between the not to exceed amount, what our monthly allocation is, and the bills and the services that you provide. One of the areas that a lot of organizations, nonprofit, government, private, have struggled in recently is recruiting and retaining, or I should say it the other way, retaining and recruiting talent, right? So people, at least for government and in a lot of other industries, they are your biggest cost. So if you have vacant positions as a entity delivering on a service contract, and you're not delivering those services, in my mind, you're not able to bill up to that not to exceed amount. So I would require more just from a staff perspective. Even if you didn't request, if the board never said, hey, this is a concern, it's going to be in my RFP anyway, because that's just how we do it. No, I would say generally. I'm not saying the homelessness one, because I haven't been directed to do anything yet, Chief Barnes. But that's one of the things we've recently included for kind of some of the reasons that were raised at the meeting.
Sure. So a couple of other things that, in Matt's opinion, are important. One is, and I don't know how this would be in an RFP other than asking what, or sharing an expectation, which is, it's not emergency shelter is not a long-term solution. It's not a long-term plan. So building in a max number of days with benchmarks. I know that when researching different shelter programs, here's I'll just throw this out as an example. Here's 60 days, and here are things, here's programming we expect you to participate in, and here are resources we expect you to take advantage of over those 60 days, ideally to be moving toward leaving homelessness. And if you're doing those things, the shelter is an appropriate place for you to be while you do that. If individuals go 60 days and they're not availing themselves and not moving the needle, then maybe that's not the appropriate place for them, and a period of time needs to pass before they're welcome back into that shelter environment. So, plenty of carrots also being out there, but then there being an accountability and a consequence for those individuals that are treating it as their long-term solution to housing. So, some accountability piece that's built into the RFP, as well as some process for engaging those guests and connecting them with resources, as opposed to just providing housing or shelter.
Okay, thank you. I think the proposal that Supervisor Conway had written a draft on, I don't know if everybody has seen that proposal. I don't know if that takes into account everything that you need in an RFP or that should be in an RFP, but it might be a starting point for the county board to take a look at and say, hey, this is what a draft RFP looks like, unless you have something already started.
No, I was pushing the pause button on putting the group together to put the RFP together, waiting to see if we had the county as a partner in doing that.
Right.
But the things that I've addressed and spoke at this meeting about already is the direction, my interpretation of the direction I received from the city council in what they expect to see in an RFP.
Okay. I know Supervisor Lemmer is here, and I know she had a lot of questions. She was at the meeting last week, and I would appreciate her input if you would like to give us your input.
Thank you. I still have questions, and I don't know, did I send you an email? I thought I sent you an email with some of the questions based on this, and I don't have my iPad, so I can't quite remember all of them, but I think some of it is, in the past, there was supposed to be a day shelter. I don't see that 24/7, 365. I see just 365. And if we're going to have programming, where do they do that? Is the day shelter off the table or part of this emergency piece? And then I guess I do want to know, where does the emergency piece fit in with the rest of that continuum? Because we really do want people to move from crisis to stability to thriving. And I think the board is going to need to know how this, maybe $200,000, if that's the amount we're going for, does that cover all of it?
So we haven't got the proposals back yet, so it's hard for me to say what could be affordable. Historically, I would share with you that the city of Wausau funded both night shelter and day shelter. The day shelter in the format in which it was being provided proved not to be effective. That was agreed by both parties, and Catholic Charities, who contracted with that for us, they ran, from a business standpoint, ran into a staffing situation where they did not want to continue contracting with the city to provide that. I would tell you that the city of Wausau has long had day shelter, in Bridge Street Mission provides day shelter services. The funds that were allocated by the city over to be spent in 25 and 26, and my proposal, which they approved, it includes night shelter. It includes the ability to fund day shelter. It includes the ability to look at transitional living, case management, and the dollars that the city has allocated to provide those services is not enough dollars to address all of those issues. Kind of pick one, and it might be enough to do that for each year. And that's where the true desire to actually move the needle and not just shelter to partner with the county so that there is enough funding to be able to look again at day shelter services. Are there other partners that we can have more than one day shelter? Is there a way to make the day shelter services that exist right now more robust, or to have more services there, or what might that look like? I haven't looked at that yet because my focus is really on May 1st and night shelter and ensuring that we have that. But that's what the money from the city has been, like the 30,000 foot view that it can be spent on. It's really to serve all the different needs of our unhoused community, and figure out what that looks like. I think all of those things get covered in a long-term plan, strategic plan that has yet to be drafted, although we have multiple examples of communities that feel confident that their plans have the ability to be successful in reaching a functional zero. But I would also say that every one of those communities that we looked at and have spoken to discuss the financial partnership both between the municipality and their county government. And they tout that as what was necessary for them to even start that process. So did I answer the question? Or?
Well, I think where I'm struggling is and we've had this conversation before in different meetings, there's the emergency piece gets people out of crisis, and that might be one entity's responsibility, if you will, in air quotes. Where I see, and this is just me speaking, I'm certainly not speaking for the board, the county has the treatment arms, and we should be building capacity, in my opinion, for that, because I don't think we have enough treatment for AODA and mental health and all the things that you need to get people out of crisis long-term into a stable and thriving place. So I think the thing that I would need is to understand the whole ask for the county, because I think it's a huge ask right now to say we need NCHC to beef up their programming, and we need the Department of Health to beef up their programming, and we need social services to beef up theirs. I mean, right there, that could be a really big investment that's needed in addition to the emergency shelter. And I know we can't necessarily plan all that right now, but it needs to be part of the initial discussion so that we're all aware of what is happening, if that's even happening, because again, this is Supervisor Lemmer's opinion and thoughts, not necessarily everybody's.
I think as I listened to fair questions from the county board during their meeting and fair questions from you, the answer that you're looking for is not something that can be done in a week or a month or maybe even a year to be able to do that. Like, I think everyone in the room, we sat and looked at the data, and we understand there's increased need for AODA care. We recognize that every community has a need for additional mental health services that are available and attainable for those individuals. But through my lens, all of that, when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if people are freezing to death outside or they're living in our parks and under our bridges, we don't have the opportunity to even get those individuals to even think about those services if those needs are being met. So from the chicken and egg example that was provided, the shelter has to be the key component, the night shelter, and then that gives us a little bit of breathing room to be able to address all the needs, day shelter services, AODA, mental health, nutrition, like there's transportation, employment, all those things. None of them do I believe get to happen if the individuals are living outdoors during that period of time. So at least for me, we got to get that taken care of before we can address those other things. But I think it's appropriate to expect a commitment both on the county's part and the city's part to get the shelter taken care of and immediately put it in high gear to address all those needs and have a comprehensive plan or map forward.
Thank you. Go ahead, Vicki.
I appreciate the question too, because this has been something that's been stirring in my mind. And we've talked about this as a committee with different people being here, is that there has been multiple evaluations and comprehensive plans that have been put forward to address the issue, but it hasn't really made a huge amount of difference because there was something missing, right? And that's when La Crosse shared their information. That's where it really, I guess, became really clear to me that the piece that was missing is entities that will own this and coordinate it, be the backbone, be the convener, whatever it is, so that all of the parties and all of the different organizations that do have a role to play are united, and there is a comprehensive, coordinated approach. And that is going to take time to plan. So I think that's really the question to the governing bodies is, what is your role in that? What do you want your role to be? And what will that look like for all of those organizations you mentioned that are under the control of the county? I agree with you 100%. You could, if the county could afford additional resources in human services, that alone is not going to solve the problem because of all the other pieces that we talked about. So we have to have that unified, comprehensive, coordinated approach is what I'm going to say. But there's not going to be an answer to that in the next week, month. That's going to be a multiple month conversation, and I think people have to realize that investing that time into doing that is what's going to give the better result. And again, looking at La Crosse in their 5-year plan, they're having success. They're in year 2.
Thank you. So I think one of the actions on the table today is to get HR Finance Chair Robinson some information to take to his committee so we can address the funding side of things for tomorrow's meeting. Chair Robinson, do you have any other asks that the committee might need for that?
I'd like to just pick up on Chief Barnes's proposal on that, sort of that outline of 60 days and accessing services. I think the concern is that we try to move people out of homelessness and provide the support to them. I think that's one of the things that the county board is looking for. So is there a way to incorporate that into the ask of the county? And if it's 60 days and you had referenced, case management or resources and job training or educational resources, if they've not availed themselves, then they wouldn't be available. But if you begin to set some parameters like that, so it looks like we're not creating an ongoing, continuing obligation that will do nothing but grow, but rather to create that accountability and create opportunities for others to move beyond homelessness.
Go ahead, Greg.
So what Chief Barnes and really what you're asking for, in my industry, I kind of use the word term limits. And that varies from mission to mission, but it's basically that, yes, you have shelter for a certain amount of time, and I'm very hesitant for us to tell whatever agency gets the RFP what that time is. They should figure that out. But there should be some kind of a term limit that a person has shelter, because then that incentivizes taking some additional steps. And then if they are taking those steps, they can extend their stay. But if they're not taking those steps, then they have to give that bed up to somebody else. Now that puts them back out on the street, but then that maybe becomes a law enforcement, issue at that point. But I think you could keep it fairly simple and just say, yes, whatever RFP comes in, whoever accepts it, they should have term limits of some kind. Let them define what those are, but have them have term limits so that it is not just warehousing, but that there's incentivizing moving people out of the crisis situation.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been taking notes and trying to capture those ideas, and I appreciate Mr. Vincent with the phrase term limit. So let me just reflect back what I've been hearing as a RFP requirement based on some of the concerns that were expressed at the county board, one of which would be coordinating with the city and county to develop and implement a term limit protocol for individuals to engage in necessary ancillary services, for example, mental health and or substance use treatment and educational resources, with the goal to move the individuals to longer term housing, for example, transitional or permanent, with a corresponding accountability mechanism for shelter services. So the idea that, hey, you got to be doing stuff within a time limit, but to your point, Mr. Vincent, not saying what that limit is, but you got to work with the city and county to come up with that and then have a corresponding accountability mechanism. So if I'm off base on that and you want different notes, let me know, but I tried to capture what the discussion was to this point on that specific item.
I think that captured it pretty well. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, but I think that pretty much captures our thoughts on the direction that we'd like to see. Supervisor Robinson, is there anything else that we can provide that you can think of? I know we need to get the short-term goal completed soon because after April, the shelter services are up in the air. So how do we convince the full board to understand that, one of the seminars that I went to that Chair Gibbs presented a couple of years ago at the county's conference was paralysis by analysis. And we don't want to get to that point where, there's the county board doesn't understand, even though they need their questions answered, that they don't understand that there are certain protocols that we have to follow to be able to put things into place to make sure our short-term goals are achieved, right? So, the long-term goals, I know Supervisor Lemmer had mentioned about, okay, what are the long-term goals? Well, right now, we're not at that point. We're at the short-term goals, right? And we're at the funding sources and being able to provide funding, whether it's through the Social Improvement Fund or some other fund that we can use at the county level, and to provide that information to the full county board without paralyzing the decision, right? I don't know if it would be prudent, Supervisor Robinson or Chair Robinson, to have some of the task members available for the meeting tomorrow at both the task committee level and at the county board level.
I would think that's always a value to have, particularly Chief Barnes, and I think Craig, if you would be available from the perspective of the community, or someone, if somebody could carry that same message that you shared earlier.
I would not be available tomorrow night, or anyone on my team. We have our big gala event of the year tomorrow, so that would not be good timing-wise. But someone else from the committee could represent. Matt Barnes and I have had many discussions about the issue, so he could probably represent us well, too.
I gave up my ticket to your gala to be here tomorrow night.
Yes, so he could represent. I think he could represent. He could represent us if you're comfortable with that, Matt.
One other issue. So one of the things that I'm going to share my opinion. I'm interested to know what everybody else thinks. Learning a lot from funding shelter over the last 2 years in the city and being involved in that, and talking to people, staff of mine who are engaged with people living in that environment, was the challenge it is to have one space for both men and women in that shelter environment. And so, and not necessarily having, especially our female unhoused individuals, not feeling safe in that environment. And so I don't know necessarily what that would look like, but I would want some communication in a request for proposal maybe in the ideal state. Ideally, we'd like to see the separation of men's quarters from women's quarters, and maybe space for individuals who are dealing with an acute issue at that moment, whether it be intoxication or mental health concerns at that moment, that don't necessarily qualify. They don't need to go to North Central Healthcare, but they might be disruptive or concerning to the other individuals in that space. So that's something that I've often thought I would want included in that proposal. But I think to the point you brought up, Craig, like, we can say, here's what we like, how might you address these concerns, as opposed to saying it has to have 2x6 walls, insulated for sound. Like, I don't know what that looks like for individuals that would produce a proposal, but at least to address our concerns when it comes to that.
Sure. Go ahead.
And youth as well, because that's also another concern for safety.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the one thing that Bill and Supervisor Conway did in his was a fundraising goal structure. I think that would be a helpful addition if you could put some limits on the duration of the county's role, is if there's an expectation that this would be picked up by the community over time. If that's going, it was in here. I think that's something that would go a long way with the county board.
Sure.
Quite honestly, when you look at this and we start talking about, we're talking about social services, we're talking about North Central Healthcare, we're talking about other things. Those are all county supported activities. So we understand that there is a role and there will be a requirement for us to make significant investments in making this work into the future.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I was just going to offer, I think, to Supervisor Conway's question and to Chief Barnes's initializing comment about how do we provide in that RFP, we can add some language that there be a commitment to implementing a protocol where individuals receiving shelter services are separated by gender, and perhaps, I don't know what the language would be, but I can wordsmith that, but the idea of some sort of mental health or some other reason that would provide a good justification for doing so. With respect to youth, I just want to be clear, we deal with that in a different way. I mean, if a youth is truly homeless, I mean, we have programs and services that we would shelter them. It's not, I don't believe it's anticipated or would be at all a future state we would want where we have youth involved in this. There's other avenues where the county already, to I think Chair Robinson's point, we already deliver services around that. And families, for that example, or for that reference.
Sure. I'm not sure if this was crystal clear to the board, but we talked about like duration and what would that commitment be. So the city of Wausau has committed not to exceed $400,000 through fiscal year 25 and 26. So there's no commitment past December 31st, 2026. And that's where the figure $200,000 as a match to the city's contribution came from. And so that's not saying it's going to be $200,000 per year. It might be less than that, but it's not going to be more. So from a timeline standpoint, that's at least the commitment that the city's made, and they're looking for a matching partner with the county.
Ask a follow-up question. So again, I'm just from the staff perspective, the cheap seats. One of the considerations that maybe I heard this wrong and took more from comments that were made than perhaps I should, but I think to HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson's point, the idea that as part of that long-term plan that I think everyone wants, right? That's the chicken and egg. Like, hey, we want to see the long-term plan before we make the short-term investment. One of those threshold questions was, hey, that long-term plan, can you answer a couple of key pieces? And one of them is, does that long-term plan envision county government being a funder of shelter? And again, I mean, we talk a lot about lacrosse. That was a great meeting for me to attend and learn a lot. My sense from that was really they're aiming for the answer to that to be no. What I heard from some of the questions, or what I inferred from some of the questions at the county board, was an answer to that threshold question. So I don't know if this body feels as though it's in a good place to make a recommendation or to recommend that any RFP that be released have a provision that says, hey, you need to be working to be self-sufficient or funded in some form other than county and city direct contribution for shelter services by insert date, and perhaps your date that you gave, Chief, is the date you want to use. I don't know if you feel comfortable doing that, but that was kind of one of the things that, trying to piece together some of the questions, I think that's what I heard. I could be wrong. I would welcome other supervisors if they had the supervisors to add their perspective, but as staff, that was what was going through my head is, hey, they want an answer. Board wants an answer to that question.
I think that's exactly it for me. You know, when I think about an emergency situation, I would, and again, this is Supervisor Lemmer's opinion, I would prefer the municipalities to fund that. And I say municipalities, not just Wausau, but any municipality who would be sending some of their crisis people for overnight shelter. We don't ask as a county for the municipalities. I don't think we do, maybe we do, to fund NCHC. We ask our taxpayers to do that. And so I'm just confused by the long term, because I know we are going to have to boost up our capacity at NCHC and possibly Social Services Board of Health, whoever's going to be. I think we're going to need almost a project manager to hire at the county level. So there's an extra staff, you know, for that long term. Again, I know we don't have the plan. So I see emergency as one project, and I see the treatment and the stability piece as a second project. And so just in my mind, I'm trying to weigh how to fund all of that. I don't know.
So of course, I'm on the municipality end of it, and my response often when I hear is like, we don't ask the city to pay for that, but everyone that owns a property in the city pays taxes to the county as well. So they are funding the services that they receive. It's not just everybody outside the municipality. And, you know, I would say through my lens, any program that we put together needs to have a goal of reducing the need for emergency shelter and probably boosting up. I'd love to see more of a need for transitional housing than boosting up emergency shelter. I think that's something that has to be measured at some point in 2026, assuming that we get emergency shelter. Because again, we can look at what ideal state looks like, but we also just need to be able to deal with, but what are we dealing with right now? And I look at it through a lens of the county's going to need to do more, the city's going to need to do more. What we're doing probably changes at what point in the plan, or how successful we are or unsuccessful we are with different things. But again, I look at what's right in front of us, and that's on May 2nd. We're going to have a lot of tents up in a lot of parks and underneath a lot of bridges, and there's green space right out here outside the county building. I can't tell my staff to make a move when there is absolutely no place for them to go. And I think what happens to Wausau at that point impacts the whole county. We're a significant part of it. So that's my stump speech.
Go ahead, Craig.
When I was initially recruited to this committee, I was recruited on the premise that our assignment was to determine what is city or what is government role, city, county government role in the unhoused situation. I wasn't under the understanding that I was supposed to solve the homelessness problem in 100 days, all right? So it seems like we're kind of tracking from what we've learned right now is that one of the recommendations should be to local government is right now that we have a emergency shelter gap, and what we're doing is inadequate, and we're asking for the city county to be a part of that. From talking with the people or listening to the people from the other community that's blew out of my mind all of a sudden. I want to say Eau Claire, it's not, it's the other community. La Crosse, thank you. Is that maybe also the role of government is to have somebody on the team who's a coordinator, and referred to that. And so I think that's our two asks right now. And how should our local government be involved? City of Wausau, county, and if there is a way to draw in the other municipalities, is that, hey, we have a crisis coming up and that there is a gap in the emergency shelter. And I think it's very appropriate to have a self-sufficiency goal. I think that's healthy and that's wise. Because again, as the faith-based representative, what the government's goal or what the government's role, another piece, and I was looking for the right opportunity to bring this up, so I'm going to bring it up now. One of the government roles would be to create an environment where the nonprofits who can address these can flourish, not be discouraged. Okay? And I'm very encouraged by the city. Previously, when we were first functioning in the city, it took us 4 years to get tax exemption on what we were doing. All right? Now, we've just applied again, Mayor, for our new building for tax exemption. But the city government role should be to encourage the nonprofits, the various ones that are represented here, and others who might submit an RFP to be able to flourish. So I would just be hesitant as a committee. I wouldn't want to recommend that we put too many constraints on the nonprofits that says, well, you know what, that's too much. I'd rather not, do that. So, you want to create an environment. So I'll sum it up real quick. So we need funding short-term for emergency shelter because what we have is not adequate, number one. Number two, it looks like we need some staff commitment from both, and city already has it, but county as well, staff commitment to help coordinate all these great things. We saw the example in La Crosse. And then third, let's just be careful that we, like we do for businesses, that we create an environment that nonprofits who can do this can flourish and not be hindered. So I would say those are the three things, at least from my opinion, that the answer to this committee is. Short-term fund emergency. 2, provide some coordination through staffing. And then third, create an environment where the nonprofits can function well. And I'm certainly welcome for pushback on that, but that seems to be the 3 things that really stands out to me.
But today we're only talking about shelter.
Correct. That's the first one. That's the first one.
Because I don't want the board thinking there's another ask for money. That's what's going to get the shelter one a no vote. So this is just for shelter. Everything else will be in the plan that this body creates. Is that fair?
That's fair. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure my mind's wrapped around this right. Is the charter for this committee to determine, like you had just said, like, what is this plan moving forward? What's that solution? Or does this group make a recommendation that staff put together what a plan is and coordinate and work through that? Because I'm not sure we want to attend enough of these in order to accomplish like what La Crosse might have done. I'm just asking for clarification.
Yeah, well, I think we have to stick with our bulleted points of like, these are your responsibilities, boom, 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 boom. Because, yeah, we don't want to get too far afield. We're not in the same place as La Crosse is. We hired Tracy Durante. We are at a better spot than they were. They fell asleep. And theirs got out of hand much higher degree than ours did. So we don't need to do everything they're doing, but we do want to do some of the things they're doing. But yeah, So I think if we stick to our list of these are, when we answer these questions, we have the first two down already, the short and medium, then the long-term ones are pretty specific and not like an overall plan to end all homelessness. That kind of plan, I think, would come from whatever comes after this 100-day one.
Yeah, I agree. So our purpose is the joint City of Wausau Marathon County Government Homeless Task Force is dedicated to developing a shared strategy relative to the role of the City of Wausau and Marathon County governments in addressing the impacts of homelessness in Wausau and more broadly in Marathon County. Its mission is to consider the holistic support needed by homeless individuals, particularly those with mental health and substance abuse treatment needs, and determine the specific direct role for local governments beyond our work in fostering collaboration among various stakeholders, businesses, community, local nonprofits, and faith-based and community organizations. So our role is to develop that strategy and direct our respective municipality or respective city in Wausau and Marathon County to develop those strategies. We can give them direction on the strategy that we would like them to take, and they can develop that strategy. So, we don't have to come up with a plan. We just have to come up with a direction to develop a plan. So right now, the short term is the funding and the emergency shelter. So if we give HR Finance our direction that we gave them the data that we want them to find the funding sources for the $200,000 for this year. And their task is to find those sources for us. So some of the questions that we answered today: number of beds, $2.5 million annually, approximately contributed by the business community, and then some of it was the fundraising and that kind of thing. But that goes along with that. I think that $2.5 million that Craig had talked about, how that's done, and it sounds like they're doing one tomorrow. With that direction, I think that, I hope Chair Robinson has enough information to take to HR Finance based on those items that I just mentioned.
And another important one is the sunsetting of taxpayer money. That was important to a lot of the folks I heard.
Sunsetting of what? I'm sorry?
The taxpayer investment.
Yes. The commitment.
Yes.
Right. Right. Go ahead.
So, because again, the focus, I appreciate you, I pulled out the mission statement too, and really doing a shared strategy of the role of the city and the county, right? And obviously we're recommending because we don't have authority as they do. I would say in addition to that, at least in my mind, and it really resonated with me when the lacrosse people were talking about their strategy and how they got everybody on the same page to move together, was that they said they were going to do things differently, and they said they were going to have a long-term plan, that it wasn't just going to be a short-term plan. So I really feel like it's the both and, because we are in a different position than lacrosse is in that they have more temporary shelter than we have right now. They also needed to add some other things, as you said, as we saw, and they added ARPA dollars for additional housing. All of that temporary, but in the beginning, when the city and county were deciding what their role was, they were really clear, and Lance had mentioned this before, is what their boundaries were, their non-negotiables. And that's part of what I don't know, I'm not on the county board, but if I was, I would want to be thinking about what would be a commitment longer term if I was concerned about this short-term commitment. How long will this short-term commitment last, and how will it end? And it'll end because there will be a plan for something else to occur, and that goes to that longer-term plan, even though it's not developed yet, but to assure people that it is not the goal for the county board to be in housing, because I know that is not something they wish to do. And that was one of the things lacrosse had, is their non-negotiables. County's not going to be in the housing industry because we have lots of other partners that are in that area. And so what the county was saying, they were going to move forward with some of that backbone support, city also, and then the services that are within their purview statutorily, they were going to look at how they could embellish those. It wasn't always putting more money into it. In some cases, there was putting some more money into it, but in other things, it was doing things differently, and that was that case conferencing in different ways. So I think it's important to talk about that there is a different way to do this as a long-term plan where we could get better results and not just focus on the shelter specifically. Yes, focus on it now because it's immediate, but if we just leave it that way, I don't know. For me, I would say that doesn't seem like that's a sustainable plan.
No, I appreciate that comment, Vicki, and I think you're spot on. I think the funding that we're looking at currently is through 2025, and then the budgetary discussions that we'll have on what that looks like after that will come later on in the year, if I'm not mistaken, Administrator Leonard.
That's spot on. You do a budget amendment to amend the existing 2025 budget, and then the county board will take up, and it seems like it's not all that far away already, the 2026 budget development, and that will be adopted sometime in November.
So as far as direction that we would like to see coming out of today, I think HR Finance, if we can provide some answers to some of their questions they might have tomorrow, we can do that. Chief Barnes, if you're available, I'll try to be there. What time is it, John? 5 o'clock. If anybody's available for that meeting, I'll go. Chief Barnes, are you available?
I'll be here.
Giving up your ticket?
Already gave it up.
Okay, sorry about that.
I'll tell you where we had to eat.
And then we have the full board meeting at 6 o'clock. I think for right now, I think let's, are we okay, Chair Robinson, you think? I just want to make sure that you have enough information to take to.
I think we've got enough guidance to go back and have that discussion tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that side of things? If not, let's talk about discussion regarding task force long-term objectives and potential designation of specific task force members to take on drafting various sections of the task force's final report. I did pass out kind of the draft action item list that can be updated or changed. I put some tentative meeting dates in there. I'm not sure if everybody's available on those dates, and we have to make sure that when I was looking at the county calendar, it looked like most of those dates were open except one, but I'll defer to Kim if she wants to take a look at that, if we want to meet on those dates. So I know that April 1st is right around the corner, so we need to come up with some clear direction and a final report for at least Administrator Leonard and his staff on what that long-term plan looks like. So please take a look at those dates. Please email me back as soon as possible. Look at your calendars if you're available at 3 p.m. on those dates. It looks like we may need to use City Hall on the 12th if we go with the 12th because I believe the county boardroom is not available.
This room is not available at all next week.
Okay. So the
24th, the whole week
So
of
the
the
26th is out?
Correct.
Okay.
It is out.
So we might have to go with City Hall on that one too, if they're available. Go ahead.
If City Hall has,
Okay.
if City Hall has, is occupied at that time, the police department has a community room which would be large enough. North Central Healthcare has some facility space. So I wouldn't want us to not meet because of a venue issue if those are appropriate places for us to be.
Okay. And I think with 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5 meetings that I have on here that will end or sunset the charter for the task force. And I think we can come up with a good plan and some direction for Administrator Leonard and the county, and then along working with the city on developing what that long-term plan looks like. I think we have a lot of good data. If you use DMAIC, we already defined the problem, we measured it, we analyzed it, now we're in the improvement side of things, right? So we know the direction that we want to go. So for myself, provide an informational presentation update in PowerPoint. I already started a PowerPoint on this, and I can share with you what I've put together, and it's just draft form right now. It can be changed, updated as needed. And one of the tasks that I tasked the city with, Becky and Terry, Sarah, just so you know, is to provide a city report from previous work plan. So what that previous work looked like and the plan that was developed by the city, so we can at least get some historical background on the direction the city was going. And I'm guessing that plan was developed over several years. The next was Chief Barnes and Beth Ann provide roles of municipalities report and what that looks like. If that's doable, I know it's kind of general, but I think the municipalities, you probably have a good handle on what that looks like as far as, you know, what we're looking for as far as what that role would look like from the municipalities. And Bill, I know that you're instrumental in what you do for work and what that business perspective looks like. I did have some conversations with one of your folks that work with the homeless, I think Kristen or Christy, and she provided a lot of insight on what you do as far as a business perspective and what that looks like, if that's possible. Is that doable? Piece of cake? I know you did the one report over lunch, so. And then Craig and Diane, I don't know if this falls under your purview, is to provide nonprofit shelter services and gap report. I know, Craig, you had put together the report of all the nonprofits that were available. I don't know if there's a report on 1 or 2 slides that you could put together, and that with Diane's help, maybe?
So just for Dan's benefit, I did a faith-based nonprofit. I haven't done the other nonprofit, but Tracy and I actually presented recently, and we have a pretty exhaustive list of who else. So it would just be a matter of putting some paragraphs so we can meet and talk through that. So I think that's more of what's happening as opposed to gap. Is that acceptable?
Sure. I mean, if you can tell what's happening and then maybe provide something where, hey, there's a gap that we could see the city or the county helping to provide some resources or whatever to fill those gaps, if you see any. And then Vicki, I know that you're on the healthcare side of things and the North Central healthcare side, and you probably have some available data that you can provide on as far as any substance abuse gaps. I know you talked about at one of our meetings about the available providers and trying to hire available providers and what that gap might look like. If that works for you.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'm also wondering, would there be a template that would be developed that would help us to have some consistency perhaps in what like the questions we're answering versus just doing something free-flowing and then there'd probably be more editing?
Well, what I can do is I can share my slide presentation with you, what I've got now. So what I basically did was follow our charter and putting that presentation together. If you look at the policy recommendations and goals, short term, I already answered that one. It's not available. Intermediate term, the 45 days, which will go along with, the gaps in the surrounding municipalities that Chief Barnes might be able to put together. And then long-term recommendations on what those gaps look like and the recommendations that we can provide. So I just kind of followed that format as I was putting it together, if that helps. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think to your point, just to ground everyone again, a really good, my sense as staff, if I were tasked with doing this as opposed to the task force, I would utilize that charter. I mean, the threshold question that, or I should say that the task that each of you, I'll use an analogy here, is Chair Cavalli just assigned each of you a respective area of homework for what will ultimately be a comprehensive research paper on, that's, the format is laid out by the task force charter, right? So the first part is, again, going over some of the data that you have received, which I think is a good background section, right? Just task force was formed, this is what we've done. And then when you get into the action you've taken, and I'm happy to draft, I can work on the action you've taken section, and even, not that I'm volunteering for work, but help you, Chair Cavelli, with kind of the background of the task force formation and some dates and just that informational stuff that any good research paper has. But then when you get to the long-term recommendation sections, the charter is written in a way that the membership really does drive each of the, or correspond, I should say, with each of the long-term areas. So recommendations relative to the specific roles of other local municipalities, particularly those surrounding that have, and those that have transported individuals, and I won't go on, but in that section, a little background. This is why this is an issue, right? A little bit to the extent you can point to data where it exists beyond the anecdotal, my sense that would be helpful. And then say, here are some broad ideas or considerations as that long-term plan is developed that should be considered. I doubt that any one of these sections you're going to be able to just provide an exhaustive list and, hey, here's what the plan is going to be. You're a task force with a relatively short charter. Nobody's looking for a 100-page research paper, but the broad strokes, right? When we move on to the gaps in mental health services, again, you've had a lot of what's the background? The data will show that a disproportionate number of unhoused individuals have underlying substance use and mental health challenges. What that requires is, you know, we have services, but how do you link them? Like laying out why is this an issue? And I think Chief Barnes did a very nice job of talking about that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's really hard to get somebody to think about how they need to attend a mental health therapy appointment 2 weeks from today when they don't know where they're sleeping. So all those things are good. If you just take a look at that task force charter and look at each corresponding bullet point under the long-term section, I think you get a good, to Vicky's point, what's the template? At least that's the threshold thing you're trying to address. There will certainly be some massaging to get the sections to flow. Again, an area where I'm not volunteering for work, but I'll certainly assist with that that effort, because, you know, again, I've kind of done that before. So I hope that's helpful, Chair Cavelli, at least from my perspective. I mean, the charter does require your reports to be ultimately written. So I think a PowerPoint is a great way to deliver information as you hand deliver the written document, but just remember that, again, maybe each section, I'm not trying to intrude, but anything longer than a couple pages for each section is probably too much. Don't want 10 pages per section. But a handful of pages probably gets it done.
Double spaced.
Yeah. Are you going to expand your character spacing as well? That was an old political science major trick. Learned that in law school as well.
Thank you, Administrator Leonard. Appreciate that. And the PowerPoint that I put together is just my way of putting my thoughts into paper. So, you know, we can, you know, with Lance's help, I think we can format it so it looks really good and presentable. So, all right. And then the team, like I said, developed a short-term, long-term direction for the county-city partnership. I have some dates in there that because we have a short window, that I would like to have the reports back by if possible. If you run into any roadblocks or need some help, definitely reach out to the task force. I think we can all be available to help in any capacity that we can. And I appreciate all your help with this. Any further discussion? Can we shoot for next week, Wednesday? Is that doable? Okay. Everybody else, are we good? Just for, and it could be a short meeting just on updates on how we're doing with the data and putting the report together.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Agenda would be due today for that.
Yep.
And we've got to determine where it will be. I have an email into Caitlin to see if City Hall is available, but I haven't heard back yet.
Or we can push it out to the 12th if that works better. I mean, I know it's a tight deadline. We can, will the 12th be better?
I was wondering if we could skip next week, so I just a little more time to work on our.
Okay. Let's plan on the 12th then. That'll probably be better. All right. Any further discussion? We have a motion to adjourn. Chief Barnes, motion. Second. Supervisor Conway, all in favor? Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lance.